What's going on, everyone? Hello, my name is Teeman and welcome to the channel. On this channel, I teach both the mindset and skill set required to have a successful career in tech. Now, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I bridge the gap that is normally left when you attend, say, like a boot camp or 4-year college, etc., etc. So if that sounds like something that will interest you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. In today's episode, we will be talking about the development of Beck Develops. So in this particular video, we are creating our consulting site from scratch. And so very first thing, the way I set this project up, just so that I have some real world experience, because what I'm trying to do is get practice all the way around as far as how things are ran in the real world. So I'm using Jira to track my progress for my project or what have you. And then in using Jira, I've created a couple epics which have some tasks that needs to be completed. This is actually in progress. So we'll switch that around. As you can see, that moved from the to-do list to in progress. We currently don't have anything on our backlog because we finished our sprint a little earlier as we were getting everything set up. And so we added some things, but there will be more things added to the backlog at some point. Beyond that, we had to first go ahead and create our navigation component for the website. And initially we started off with an HTML file. All right, so let's see here. You probably need to zoom my text in a little bit. So we started off with a basic HTML file with just the docutype HTML, the HTML language is English. We had our header, which the only thing initially inside of our header was the meta character set UTF-8. This, which allows for mobile responsiveness, as well as our title. Now, everything else was added later on. These were added because we're using a font off of Google Fonts. And so these are things that you need to add into your head data to be able to use those. And then this line of code here is specifically for our styling, which is located in styles.css. Originally, we started off with our index.html file, blank file. We added in our initial HTML document, which most of the time I think you can hit like the bang or exclamation and tab and it'll fill it in for you. Let's see. Let's just delete this and see. I might have an extension. But yeah, so this is pretty much what it looks like when I first started out. We have just our regular index.html page. Nothing else going on. Let's just give a save on that and a refresh. And then I'll show you how the website looks now that we have basically removed everything. And so this is our blank page where we have absolutely nothing. Let's undo that. All right. All right. So we'll break this down piece by piece so you'll see exactly what all happened in this development session. This probably took me about 2 days. All right. So currently we have none of our links work. So we'll just throw it out there for now. None of our links work at all. And that's okay because inside of our code, as you can see, we don't really have any, we don't even have them linked to anywhere at all. Just placeholders. And then you'll see here, I have a lot of classes and then a lot of stuff going on behind them. All of these are CSS classes, which dictate how the images or how the different components are rendered and placed on the page. And I'll get a little bit into that. But initially, the very first thing we worked on was our header section, right? So we're going to take that. I'm going to delete everything else for a second. All right. And so initially, this was our first work. So let's talk about this. All right, so the very first thing that we wanted to do was to create a navigation component which allowed our links to be placed across the top of the screen. We also wanted a login link as well as a sign up button. Now I have this little hamburger menu here, and this is more so because once I get ready to start development on the mobile application, this hamburger menu will be hidden on the desktop versions and will only show once the screen size drops down probably to about here. When the pixels start changing around, I'll probably have this hamburger menu pop out to replace all of these, and then you'll be able to click it and also still see home, services, about, blog, login, etc., etc. Now, how we did this, the very first thing that we decided to do was inside of our body tag, we placed our header section. And then inside of that header, we created a div to house all of our components. And we wanted to style that specifically without affecting the size of the header when we try to change the length of, say, the navigation component, the bar itself, or the background that may extend beyond the size of the header. And so what we did here, we added a class of, well, before we get into the classes, let's just break down the structure of the document. We created a div, and then we created a container div for our picture, which is our logo. So this is our logo. That's that specific div with a height of 100 pixels. And now if we inspect this, we can see that our image here does indeed have 100 by 100. That's the height. It's 100 by 100. So originally, after we created our div for our image, the very next thing we had was a unordered list. And in that unordered list, we had about 4 list items, which consist of our home, service, about, and blog lines of code. And what I'll do for the demonstration of what we're doing here, I'm going to go ahead and delete some more stuff. Well, actually, I don't want to keep deleting stuff, and then I guess I could always just re-pull my GitHub code. But I want to show you what happens when I remove some of these classes so we can get an understanding as the CSS that's being applied to the initial HTML markup. Now, typically an ordered list literally shows as a list on the page, you know, bullet points or 1, 2, 3, 4. But we added this class of flex. Now let's show you what the flex class is, or at least the way that we have it set up. Essentially, we just created us a display flex class so that we can apply it ourselves. And as you can see in our CSS, a lot of what we're doing is specific. So we were creating basically little classes here and there that we need. Say if we need like Z index of 10 for something to be layered on top of a component, or if we need some top, like margin top, how many pixels top, or, you know, margin, auto left, right, the max width, text sizing, text color, border spacing, letter spacing. We have a lot of basic CSS selectors that we have the capability to use within our diagram or in our design. We also set up our brand colors here at the root of our CSS document. In our CSS document, we decided to take the approach of creating a root class or root in our CSS that incorporated all of our brand coloring, because our color scheme that we decided to come and go with would be based off of this. Now, I don't own real-time sites or realtimecolors.com, but this is a great website where you can go and see how your color schemes would look on your websites. And I mean, here you can literally just hit space bar to randomize, and then to give you various options. You also can toggle between light and dark modes, etc., etc. So I have my color scheme picked out and designed, and I implemented these colors that, as you can see, are the hexadecimal values into our selector so that we have accessibility to those. And as you can see, you know, I'm using one case where I'm using them here, various things like here. And there are other ways that you can approach this, but because we're trying to learn the most CSS possible, the most HTML possible, the most JavaScript possible, so that we can understand foundations, We're going to do a lot of things ourselves without using libraries such as Tailwind or any of the other modern or popular CSS frameworks. It's hard to use a library when you really don't understand all the components that are inside of the class itself. So that's the whole entire purpose of what we're doing. So anyway, we got our CSS selector set up with our brand colors for both the light and dark color scheme. And then we went ahead and added in a margin of 0 and padding of 0 for all components to basically reset the default padding or margin that browsers themselves include on components. And this allows us for absolute positioning when we're trying to design our site. All right. Now, next thing up, as we were developing, you could see that sometimes your text is blurred a little bit. And so to ensure that we have clearer context when we're looking at our text, we decided to add in the anti-alias and grayscale on our body tag or our body element. And you would literally copy it's prefaced by a WebKit in the front, but it's dash WebKit dash font dash smoothing. And we're going to use the anti-alias attribute. And then I think this is like the Mozilla version of it, if I'm not mistaken. I could be. So definitely go and do your own research on that, but you'll do the dash mosh dash OSX dash font dash smoothing there. And then we decided to use a font family of Roboto with a fallback of sans serif. And so we had to go ahead and apply that on both our body, which that's this entire tag. But I also did it on our button to ensure that it shows up properly and is not encapsulated in a way where it doesn't show. Because I believe that when I did not have it on there, oh no, it's in my body tag, so it's in there. I think that would be on my section where I had to add it. Or did I even have to add it? Well, I mean, I guess I selected it on the button, so all buttons will have it anyway. All right. The very next thing that we set up inside of our CSS was that we wanted our background color to be that of our brand coloring. So we also set up a CSS selector for that header. And the reason we did that is because if we don't have that on the header, let's just take this out for a second. And let's see what happens. So if we don't have the background color on our header, as you can see, everything becomes white. Our header is no longer has a background. And so even though we selected the body tag, oh, well, I guess we didn't have a background of dark on the body because the header is its own section and this section is its own section. So different sections will have different background colors according to where they're placed, what are their dynamics, etc., etc. Let's get a refresh in. All right, as you see, once we replaced our background header color selector, our background returned to black or whatever this color, dark color is. I think this is a black color. All right, so outside of the header, the very next thing that we decided to do, which I can take some of these classes off so you can see the effects. First, we added, well, let's go back to our CSS file. So looking back at our CSS file, there are various display properties that we have access to or that we can use in our designs. Now, some of the most common would be display block, which essentially allows your HTML element to have block or basically take up the entire line of code. And then you have inline, which allows something, say, such as like a div, which is a block level element, to be on the same line as other divs if there's enough space. So that's where you get inline. Then you have some things like, actually we could pull it up because we only other ones we use really in our design thus far is flex, and flex gives a lot of capability, but we'll have to dive deeper into that in a moment. Now looking at some of these CSS selectors, I mean not selectors, but the display properties. So like we say, we have inline where you do display an element in the same line as other elements. You have a display of block, which allows that element to be basically one block and it take up that entire area. Then you have, say, flex and grid. I actually like grid and I use it a lot when I'm doing Java development for like various applications. However, I have not really used it much in JavaScript as a developer in profession. And that's probably because I've did a lot more with Java than JavaScript. Sometimes you see inline block and it just allows you to, like it says here, it's inline element, but you can apply height and width values. And so this is more so like when you're trying to, what's a good case used for inline block? So here, yeah, with the inline block, one of the biggest things, it just basically allows you to create those like block containers for your content that will automatically wrap as the screen is changed in size. Similar to how, as you can see, all it takes is a seed and develop highly intuitive and engaging websites, how the text moves as the container gets wider. But at a certain point, the text does no longer move because it's set with a minimum or maximum size. But then as you can see, as we get smaller and smaller, it decreases. And at a certain point, you can see that this text gets a lot smaller and cramped up. And that's because we began working on our mobile design, but we're really not anywhere that far with that at the time. It's more so just, playing around with some things here and there. So beyond that, let's go ahead and take this flex inline off of this unordered list class and see what happens. Okay, so as you can see, home, service, about, and blog are now here. Oh, you know what? Let's take this background off so you can see something. I want you to see something else as well. Let's take this guy off. Now, you can no longer see the text, but I wanted to show you. Once we remove those particular classes off, the inline and the flex. So inline allowed these home, service, about, and block, which are their own. The list item is its own block item. It takes up the whole length of how much space this container has. However, by adding both, you have to add the flex property if you are going to use something like inline. Like if you're going to use a display, you have to add. Wait, let's see. If we add just flex by itself, what does that do? Okay, so if we have flex, just allows it to stretch out. Wait, but what does inline do? Because I had a class of both flex and inline. That's a good question. I wonder if those little dots are still there. Now that I see that, let's see. Yep, they are still there, so I need to get rid of those. Okay, so. I wouldn't have seen that if I did not do this in this video, so that's good. So we got a no underline on our links. All right. Because we didn't want our links to be underlined. And that's another CSS property that we created based off of the text decoration, 9. We have a lot of things going on here. Give me 1 second. Oh, and I want to let you all know something. Never be afraid to look stuff up. The best way to learn when you're developing is to literally look things up if you don't know what's going on. Now, I'm not saying Google how to do the whole project. No, what I'm saying is if you have a specific question, say we just came into an issue where we have these bullets on our document, right? To get rid of those, I just Googled, you know, how do you remove the bullets from a list item, CSS, and you just add a list style type to none. So let's do that. List style type. We're going to set that to none, right? Let's save that. We're going to refresh. Now we can't really see, so let's get rid of this background color again. Refresh and bam. Now we no longer have those bullet points on our list items. So that's an easy fix. Okay. That's working as intended. All right, now outside of that, we have, like I stated, the list items, which they're chilling there. And then we added our button, the last thing on our navigation component. Now looking at this div, we encapsulated our button and our login link with the div so that we can keep it flex in line. Because if we didn't have this flex in line, they would just be stacked on top of each other. As so, once they scroll down to a smaller size. Now, don't get me wrong, they'll be able to have spacing until you shrink it down because it's inside of a flex box. The parent container is a flex box. So everything will move around. So to ensure that things stay where they are, we add also flex in line. And that way, as we resize, it no longer stacks on top of each other. Okay, so you see that? Boom. And then another thing that we added to our button was, so let's get into some of these CSS classes that we first created. So here you see I say PX24 and PY12, M36 or M8. All of these are basically pixels and how far I want to move them on the x-axis or the y-axis. Say M might be margin. If you see P by itself, it's probably padding. If you see like PT, it's probably padding top. You know, you see PB, it's probably padding bottom. But for the most part, if I'm adding padding top and bottom, I'm going to use the PY. And if I'm adding pixels or padding to the left or right, I'm going to use the PX because it's just keeping it on the X or Y coordinate as far as, you know, my understanding and how I categorize things in my mind. So with my CSS structure, I'm going to tell you how I set my file up. I have my roots at the top. Then I start off by resetting the entire browser's default margin and padding. From there, I add in basically all of the elements that I want to do something to specifically. The body, normally I want to have the content or the words, the text a little smoother to read and doesn't look obscured or blurred or pixelated. And that's why we use the anti-alias or grayscale. So I add that to the body component. Also added our font family to both the body and the button. And then the header itself, I added the background as you saw. When we remove it, it changes the entire coloring. I just added this list item property to remove those bullet points. Now, after I finish with the actual HTML components or elements, I move into my display, and these are a display of block, inline, flex, etc., etc. You can add as many of these type of CSS selectors as you like. It's more so personal preference and how you learn. Ultimately, as you begin more and more development or become more and more comfortable, you'll probably switch to other frameworks such as Tailwind because it's a professional it's a bigger library that has a lot of support. You know, and if you're looking for a job, you probably will touch Tailwind in your development career. All right. So anyway, we have a couple of other classes that we set up that we're going to be using with our flex box. Saying for instance, like say justify content, and we're going to use space between, and we use that here. What's that justify between? Yeah. And that's in this on the nav component. This ensures that we have enough space in between. And if you ever get confused on the different CSS selectors or the different flex properties, you can always go look at the Mozilla Firefox website as far as documentation. You want to be a better developer, learn how to read documentation. It's literally all the answers. It's like a big puzzle. They give you the puzzle pieces, but you're the one that draw the puzzle. You decide how the puzzle looks at the end. So you have to remember that. But yeah, anytime you get confused on properties, I usually check MDN web docs because I feel like they're one of the more official documentation sources because it's Firefox. But yeah, so there's always a lot of documentation information here to read. I probably should put that in the video link somewhere. I don't know. We'll see. All right. So now let's get into one of the harder parts of this particular project. The header section itself was not too bad. I just played around with different components, got them situated how I want to. Currently, I have this little hamburger menu on the side, which again, I said that's going to be for mobile view, but it's just sitting here in its own little div. And I have it right now as a background color light, which is my white coloring. And the reason I do that is because if I didn't have this here, you wouldn't even see. And if I didn't have inline, it would stack underneath the component itself. Well, I'm gonna show you. Let's save this. You no longer see the hamburger menu because it has no background color. But if you inspect and we look down here into the console, you can see that there is an SVG here. It's still there. It's just hidden because of the coloring. And so, you know, currently I just have it set up to where it's on the page because I needed to see it and make sure I'm seeing my progress. But that'll change here and there. Beyond that, what else we got going on in this particular Devlog? Oh, and I do apologize if it looks it's a little late. It's like 3 a.m. Trying to put this content out. All right, so once we got down to our hero section, I'm gonna tell you exactly how we developed this. The very first thing that we did was we went over to Canva, right? And you can start designing anything here. You can design website sections, business cards, YouTube, thumbnails, logos, banners, all kinds of stuff. And so what I did was I created a hero section here, which had my image already sized how I wanted it. And then I'm pretty sure I didn't have a background. I got this image and I downloaded it with no background. When you hit download, you can hit a transparent background. And that's what I did there. And that allowed me to have the sizing of the document that I wanted inside of my file. So here, well, not that one. So here, as you can see, this is the same exact cut screen that you saw on Canva without any of the background coloring, any writing, any text, any of that stuff. So once I got this object or this particular document from Canva and I saved with a transparent background, the very next step was that I added it into my section. Okay, so now let's get it here. And there's that image in the section. And then I'm going to show you how that looks with just it being in the section itself. So without everything that's on the screen, if I didn't have all of the other text, this is literally how it looks. All right. And the reason I have a black background is because I added to my section the background coloring. But say if we remove this, now we'll just have an image. I say that. Let's see. Oh, I still have the coloring. I see what's going on. Let me undo that. Undo all of that. So for us to remove the coloring behind our image, I'm gonna show you what we had to do to even ensure that we had the coloring the entire time. So let's remove this first. Again. And then in our actual image, we had to add the class of one, we did absolute so that we would have absolute positioning. And then we drew a width of full, which if you look at our CSS, it just gives us a width of 100%, as well as max image. And that just gives us a max height and max width of 100%. And then I had to add that background color because sometimes the image expands beyond the section, or it used to, but let's see. Let's save that and refresh. And now as you can see, we removed the background image. We removed the coloring off of our class. Our class coloring off of our image. And there now you see it's just transparent again. All right, so let's undo that. We'll put our color back there. Boom. And then for us to do as you can see, even though we have the coloring on the section, on the image itself, it doesn't show because the image is overlaying. Right. And then from there, we added in our markup, which I can show you how that looked before we added all our classes. Actually, I can't show you how that looks because that's a lot. But essentially what we did was we took our content, whatever content that we wanted on our site, which was all it takes is a seed, and then develop highly intuitive, this paragraph, and then this for our button. So we took that particular text. The very first thing was that we styled our all it takes is a seed. We put that in the H1 tag because we wanted it to have one, it's the header of the page, and we wanted it. We can always change the sizing of things, but it's the H1, so we know that it's the most important content at the time. Now, we also wanted to add our little accent of branding, or we wanted to be able to manipulate colors within the H1 without assigning the other part of the H1, which is a seed portion. We didn't want to have to give it its own H1 tag because you should only have one H1 per section. And that's just good semantics for SEO, Google indexing, things of that nature. So what we did was we wrapped the last portion in a span tag, right? And by doing that, it gives us the capability to change the coloring. And as you can see, we added a text accent dark. We also made it block. And then a margin top of -16. And that's probably because it was too distant from the all it takes. Is because, again, browsers add default padding for elements. And so when we added the span tag, it gave us some additional spacing. So we just made that a block element, and we gave it a -16 margin to move it up some. Then we wrapped another span inside of the span, double span, with the text secondary dark, because we wanted it to give, we got an accent and then we go dark. And I may add something behind this, maybe like a white line underneath the word seed, just to give it like a standout type of vibe to it, but we'll see. Beyond that, we styled our content and our button, and we reuse a lot of our classes. So say for instance, for our button, we use the class of PX24 and PY12. So what that means is we added padding on our both left and right of 24, and we can validate that here by looking at our PX24 class, which is our padding left 24, padding right 24. We also added padding to our top and bottom, so that's also the 12. We added just a margin top of 24, which is probably somewhere here. Yep. And then we put our color. I mean, we also did other things. We took the border off, so we made a class called no border, and for that, I'm gonna show you no border. You just put border none. Bold, which font weight bold. We also, like I said, we set up primary color selectors. And then BR5, this is border radius. So border radius just allow you to curve the edges of your buttons. So say here on our sign up, I think we use a border radius of 10. Whereas on our schedule your free consultation button, we use a border radius of 5. Now, the higher that number is, the more round your element will be. So sometimes you may see like default settings of like 99999 pixels, 9,999 pixels or 999 pixels. It's because a lot of developers try to, you'll never hit 9,999 pixels on the screen. Let me rephrase that. With today's technology, there is a possibility, but essentially it ensures that the element itself stays rounded no matter how big or small the screen rotates. All right. So after we did that with our mockup, which at some point was underneath our image and its section, what we had to do to align it to where it is on the screen. So the very first thing that we had to figure out was how to move the information from beneath, because everything was set up as a block element at first, to on the side here. So what we had to do through our research and discovery, we did a couple things. So we had to add a position of relative to the div that contained all of our documents. All of our information. And this was the initial div. I ended up creating a second div that encapsulated it because I needed to do some other things like add direct style, padding, and left, and et cetera, just for as the screen got larger and smaller, certain things I had to keep alignment. But I started with a position of relative, and then I added a Z index of 10. And what that allows you to do is to stack on top of basically it takes the element out of the document flow. And so it sits on top. So from there, since I did that, I went ahead and added the relative Z index. And then I gave it a max width of 540 pixels. And so what that means is once it reaches a certain size, you see how it says develop highly intuitive and engaging websites, and that or does no longer move no matter how big I get or make the screen, resize it. But if I make it smaller, you see how it starts to flex down and fit into whatever space is given to it. So that was what that max pixels was for. Well, actually, the 540 was for the top portion. All it takes is a seed so that it lines up like this, where is a seed is at the bottom of the container. And then I had to do the same thing for the text. So I should use a max width of 440 pixels for the text, 540 for the heading. Like I said, I added a lot of little classes. And as I began to refactor, you may see some things in here say, like, for instance, text 16 pixels and then small text 20 pixels. What this really means is currently, since I just started my media queries, if my min width, or essentially once my screen reaches a minimum of 688 pixels, Once it goes below that, my text size switches from 20 when I'm above 688 to 16. So the pixels here switch to 16 for this heading. And then, well, actually switch to 32, 36. Okay, so we're looking at two different things at the same time. So here, this text size is 36 at this window size. But once we go above 688 pixels, we get back to the 65 pixel text. And as you can see, you'll see that as we resize. See that? And so that's just a little bit about mobile response. And I mean, a lot of this is going to change as we develop more and more. So overall, on the first set of tasks that we were creating and getting done, we got those done. That was in our first little devlog. And now we are working towards dark light mode, getting us a little favcon item in our tab. And we're working on the mobile layout for the design. As you can see, we already got the hamburger menu on the page. It's just not doing anything yet. So, you know, but we're trying to set up our tickets to be a little bit more professional. Get in the habit of actually logging our time, marking off, tracking our work. This is good documentation as far as development. But for now, I believe that's all I got. And I'll see you all in the next one.